Welcome to Microsoft Ignite the Tour in Amsterdam. Here we are going to be talking about the fundamentals learning path. I am session number 4 in the fundamentals learning path, and we're going to be talking about security. Security is probably something that is very important and also near and dear to your hearts, working in the IT world in some way, shape, or form. I am Rick Claus. You can reach me up there in case you're interested at all those different types of coordinates. I'm a cloud advocate. I've been at Microsoft for about 15 years or so. And security is something that I've worn as one of a number of different hats in previous roles at Microsoft, and also when I was working as an enterprise consultant and also working as an IT person way back when security was very much front and center for what is going on. Those types of security folks that exist that are now changing their opinions and minds about what to do with this thing called the cloud. The concept of having the automatic no whenever anything was asked is now hopefully starting to fade away into the background for most people, for most organizations, because everybody's realized that there is so much more that can be done when we start to talk about scale, when we start to talk about the public cloud, the benefits of using a cloud environment like Microsoft Azure. But the interesting thing is, even still inside the occupation of someone that does security, a security analyst, or someone that is going to be interested in security as a whole for their organization, the attitude is still kind of interesting because you continue to make similar assumptions to what you used to make in the past. So in this first section of this delivery, this content I'm going to be talking about here, think about how you currently think about your on-premises environment that has no connectivity to anything else, and how you might have been doing your role in your job and your interest in security for years and years and years. And then think about now how it's going to look like in the new world, in the more evolved world. So generally, we use the same assumptions that we learned from all of our experiences. Having to deal with firewall rules, having to look at logs for intrusions, having to go in and do analysis of a breach and that sort of stuff, all those assumptions that we're making are all based on on-premises technologies. And we have to evolve those now to involve working with workloads that are not necessarily in the cloud. So really, the cloud is a different place that we're working in. So how specifically is it different? Well, let's even just take about the basics. A bad actor in the olden days was someone that was on the other side of our corporate networks. We thought of our environments of corporate networks were these lovely walled gardens that we had complete control over and protection. The worst would be when you had an intrusion that was someone from the inside of those particular firewalls, inside of those brick and mortar walls that had access to the network that you would have to worry about trying to find out. But the bulk of the stuff that you were concerned about was someone on the outside trying to break in, steal in physical security or through the firewalls or whichever. But now, everything is the potential of being on the other side of that firewall. It's inside of a public region, inside of Azure, that is inside of a massively hyperscaled multi-tenant environment that has all sorts of protections around it, but now it's outside of where your safety of your brick and mortar, your kingdom happens to be right now. And the funny thing is, we're also outside of that firewall as well as individuals working in security. That brings a new perspective to things. In the old on-premises model, sensitive workloads used to have the ability to be inside of isolated air-gapped networks that had only the people that needed to have access to that data on the same network, or maybe the sensitive data itself, the servers, the databases, the crunches, the reports, were all also contained inside of this one subnet, this one area that you could monitor closely. Well, you can't set up an air-gapped network inside of a public cloud because you have to get to it somehow. So you no longer can have those same kind of assumptions. You have to design for the fact that it's now going to be available inside of a public environment. That obviously doesn't mean that you have to open up your resources to the outside world. You can keep that private to yourself, but still, physically, there is no air-gapped network inside of a public cloud environment. In the old on-premises world, your identity, your credentials that you would use to be able to have access to those different workloads and services generally weren't the same as your organizational credentials. This is the olden days. Usually you would have one set of IDs and you'd simply go off and you'd work with them, but then maybe you would have a different SAP solution you'd have to have a different login for, or a billing system you have to have a different login for. Again, this is back in the olden days. But they weren't, the important part, they weren't your organizational credentials. Nowadays, they should be the same, usually through a federated identity to enable single sign-on, to make it easier for your end users, and also safer and more secure for you, because you can simply block or terminate or disable login for a particular individual, then you know that all the rest of the logins for all the rest of the systems are safe. But the double-edged sword to that is that now those organizational credentials are appearing in all sorts of different data breaches all over the place, because an end user is going to be very comfortable when they have to use a new service to simply use something that they know. Their user ID and their password, probably the same password as their corporate ID. So in all those different security breaches that you can find out about on the Have I Been Pawned website, as an example from Troy Hunt, the number of government addresses that are in there are quite shocking. The number of .com addresses from different companies are quite shocking, but it's just the way that the world works. So you have to be prepared for that. Now, the benefits of a security cloud model is kind of interesting. I mean, step for a moment back and think inside of your heads right now. Inside of your organization, how many different unique workloads exist that you have to support? You've got your accounting system, you've got your invoicing, you've got your inventory, it all depends obviously uniquely to your business, but you've got all these different discrete pools of information, different workloads that you're worried about, that you have to worry about yourself. But right now, do you know the properties of every single one of them? Do you know how well secured they are across the board? What about the ones that you inherited from somebody else because they moved on to a new role, or as you acquired a new company, all the ones that they happen to have as well? Every single characteristics of password length and single sign-on, all sort of stuff, how they're set up, do they use encryption for the database? All those different nuances with security, you probably don't have an up-to-date, accurate picture of absolutely every single thing that's out there, and you have to update and continuously be there. The cloud security model also gives you complete visibility into all of these workloads if they're running inside of an Azure subscription, because I'm going to show you a tool in just a little bit that's going to help you do this kind of analysis and give you visibility into how you can make your security footprint stronger and more protected inside of this type of environment. Now, the cloud security model gives you access to all of this, but it also potentially would give a successful attacker access to these as well. So there's obviously going to be a level of shared responsibility. So there are good and bad things that are there. Now, are you aware of the nature of all the properties of all the different types of attacks that could possibly happen against your environment right now? Maybe you are definitely among the more advanced that are already using different solutions that are able to go in and aggregate all your logs, aggregate all your access, talk about all the firewall rules, talk about all the accesses and bad logins for your domain controller, and then do some analysis on that to be able to figure out what's going on. Quite possible you're already in that kind of a state. In the cloud security model that we're able to provide and work with you with inside of your Azure environments, it actually has the ability to adapt and to learn from the threats that are happening to other environments that happen to also be on top of Azure. Take those learnings, and then if they're anonymized and we have access to them, be able to apply them to all the other customers as well. As new malicious actors turn up, as new botnets start to do an attack, as new malware executables become available, we know that information because other customers have been compromised with those. Potentially, and have potentially allowed us to understand what those particular different things are. The analogy that people like to have for this one here, if you're a Star Trek fan, is the concept of the Borg, where one node of the Borg learns of something, instantly all the rest of the nodes of the Borg are also aware of it and can now leverage that particular technology. Same kind of concept. Now, this is called a Microsoft Security Graph. And basically, it is the public telemetry. This is not the private information that's unique to you that we don't have access to and that we can't see. This is the stuff that we see with things that happen before it hits the individual customer. We have 40, I lost track, 42, 48, 46, I forget how many are active right now, but above 40, less than 60 regions around the world with data centers that are having and hosting different Microsoft customers' solutions and workloads inside of. We handle, just even with Office 365, over 5 billion blocked threats that come in absolutely every single month across all these different networking points that we can see trying to come in. We have over 400 billion emails that are analyzed every single month through our spam filters and phishing filters that are coming in to go to these different systems. We have 450 billion different authentications against Azure Active Directory every single month from a variety of different sources that are all out there across the world. We have a 1.2 billion devices that are going to be updated inside of our infrastructure on a monthly basis and using Windows Update and Update telemetry. We've got 18 billion Bing page scans per month of new content on the internet that might have malicious code, cross-site scripting, or other types of anomalies coming in that are being scanned by our search engines for inclusion inside of our data sets. We've got 3,500 plus different security professionals working at Microsoft inside of Microsoft security researching environments that are able to go off and analyze and bring all this. All these resources we bring together into Microsoft Graph, and then we've turned it into something that is now being leveraged by a tool that's called Azure Security Center that is available to you to be able to go off and to look at with your resources that are on the system. But then we also have gone in and taken a lot of these learnings and made changes to the way that services work. In the past, when you've spun up a new Azure web instance, a new web app that you wanted to go off and deploy your application to, we would automatically go ahead and give it access to it with a public IP, and you'd be able to go off and to work with it, you'd be able to deploy to it, and everything would be great. Maybe you don't want to have that available as a public IP. You have to request one to be able to have access to it publicly, because your design is actually going to only be available through your own private express route connectivity for the way you've designed it. Or if you go off and you deploy a brand new virtual machine. Deploying a brand new virtual machine by default used to leave port 3389 open on the internet if a public IP was assigned. That's not exactly a great thing that I would do ever, but it was the default when we first started. We've made changes to how things are deployed so that these defaults no longer are open, no longer are there, and you have to override those defaults to be able to make those changes. So all this information has come in and has evolved how we make services available, and also through analysis, some recommendations on how you can make your environment more secure and available as well. So starting off, just thinking about those workloads that you happen to have as an example. How many different identity providers exist in that infrastructure that's out there? How many different identity providers do you have to have in place for both the hardware and software environments that are inside of your environment? Having a consistent single identity model across all those different workloads will greatly simplify your accounting practices and password policies, multi-factor authentication, and tooling that you can use to dramatically increase your security footprint. But having a consistent identity provider across all of those workloads is something you can also now use and leverage with inside of Azure building blocks as well. So I can have it so that I can give your organization, can design guide rails that you can give parameters and policy for your developers and your development teams to only develop and to deploy resources inside of certain regions, inside of certain sizes of machines, inside of certain development subscriptions as opposed to production subscriptions. I can go through and have automated policies to start and to stop things inside of your environment as well. I can make it so that Sally or Bob or Susan or whoever that needs to go off and work with the machine doesn't even have remote access to that machine unless they request it, and then they get it for a period of time and then it shuts itself off automatically. All these different functionalities are possible because we are using a single identity provider, which is Azure Active Directory, which is federated with your on-premises Active Directory, or possibly is set up so that you're sharing password hashes with Azure Active Directory up above to be able to do it. So you don't have to build a brand new security model. You can use your existing one that you're already comfortable with. How much work is it to ensure that your on-premises data center is compliant with security standards? Has anyone survived a particular different security audit that's responsible for your organization? Maybe an ISO 27007 ISO certification that you have to have and maintain for your data center in order for you to be compliant with your auditors. Maybe some other security parameters that you have to ensure that's all there. That requires you have all your systems up to date. You have a policy for how to update them. They're all been patched, they're all been updated. But as things change and as things evolve through the data center, as it grows, the next time that audit comes around within a year's time, it's a big amount of effort to go off and go through. Well, from our perspective, all of our data centers inside of Azure regions, all of our regions are basically certified already for a couple of these particular important certifications and attestations that exist. There is a whole web page dedicated to just showing which ones we happen to adhere to on a per country basis, on a per industry basis. I strongly suggest you go off and take a look at that if you're interested. These ones are rather interesting because I'll be able to show you some tools that'll help you make sure that your environments are also compliant as well. Now, if you think about your environment, you're providing compute resources to your customers, your internal customers, your users. You're providing a virtualization platform for them to be able to go off and use, more than likely. Are you able to, with complete conviction, know that every single firmware on every single hard drive, every single controller, every single NIC card is up to date across your entire fleet of infrastructure at any given moment in time? I'm willing to bet probably not, because it's a very, very large undertaking. If so, congratulations, fantastic. That is something that we have to do in the public cloud all the time. So we maintain that fabric, we maintain the firmware levels, we maintain everything as far as that underlying level at the fabric level and at the hypervisor level for you. You simply worry about deploying on top of that. A prime example of that was the lovely issue that we had that every single Intel-based machine had with Spectre and with others that were out there. It was processor level stuff. We had to apply all those updates across our entire fleet way before that went available and visible for what's there. With the cloud security model, basically, we're continuously monitoring for security improvements, continuously monitoring for updates to our infrastructure, and also making sure that the underlying architecture of our fabric is hardened and ready to go for that platform. Now, right now, I'm telling all the good stuff. I sound probably pretty much like a salesperson about how fantastic Azure is. But it's not all fine and dandy. There are issues that you have to be aware of when you start to use a cloud environment. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. This applies to no matter which cloud environment you decide to use. But there obviously is a potential for a greater attack surface area in a cloud for cloud-native apps. There is less known around what you need to do from a security perspective inside of the new cloud-native world for how you're going to go off and work. A lot of PaaS workloads potentially are open to the public based on how you've done your deployment because of simply lack of skills and lack of awareness for when things were deployed to make sure what different attack vectors need to be updated. It's potentially possible for a malicious or a compromised account within inside of your organization to all of a sudden now have access to a bunch of different workloads just because you're just not up to date on the policies for which accounts are being used across the board. It's natural with the number of workloads that you happen to have. This is not unique to you. This is common with everybody using some level of a cloud provider. But most cloud customers have a relatively low level of knowledge around the fact that there is a definite shared experience and shared responsibility that exists that we have to enter into an agreement as a provider with Azure talking to our most valuable customers and every customer that we have. This shared responsibility is something that's important to bring up. So I've brought it in here as just as an example. The shared responsibility across the board for cloud security are committed to you that we're going to make sure that our physical assets of our data centers, our network, our foundation layer of our fabric, our physical hardware, anything that's able to store data inside of a data center, all that sort of stuff is going to be physically secured and available inside of a controlled process, and will never end up leaving our data center in any kind of form that it can be read. We have a massive amount of investment inside of our data center personnel that are highly trained. We have all of our data centers in our regions go through attestations and audits on a regular basis. We actually have one of the highest level of certifications across the number of certifications that are common across all of our regions out of all those different cloud providers. Now, the joint responsibility comes into play with virtual machines, comes into play with networks and network configurations, into the different apps and different workloads that you happen to have, into the data itself. That's where you have to take ownership on this. We're going to do our best to change the defaults to make it secure by default, that you have to go in and open things up and turn things on. You're making a conscious choice. But once you've deployed a virtual machine running Ubuntu 18, or running Red Hat, or running Oracle Linux, or running Windows, doesn't matter which one. Once you've deployed that machine, you're responsible for that OS. We're responsible for the layer beneath that and the fabric and the infrastructure, but you still have to patch. You'd be surprised the number of places that I've been to that they still think, oh, I deployed that a year and a half ago, and they have never patched it. It has to still be patched on a regular basis. You have to do reporting on those. That happens to be out there. So the part of, in the IaaS environment, you're definitely responsible for a lot more on the stack. As you move up into the PaaS workloads, into the container workloads, there's less stuff to worry about, but you still have to worry about a lot of it. You still have to have a holistic view on it. Then ultimately the data, which is yours, you're responsible for that as well, how it sits. Now, the trick is, where do you start and what do you do? And the good part is that we have a solution that addresses all of these needs virtually immediately, so long as you just go there and click on the option to look at it. And that solution is called Azure Security Center. Azure Security Center is your one-stop shop of using all of the knowledge of all of the things that we've learned through all of those billions and billions of logins, of internet traffic coming in, of malicious actors, of all sort of stuff. All that knowledge inside of Microsoft's security graph is available for us to be able to then reveal to you, specific to your workstation environment, specific to your workload environment, inside of it. Now, the Security Center itself basically was able to go in and to look at a wide variety of different areas. Identity and access management obviously is one of the very first ones. But then is also able to give you recommendations on how to ensure that you've got a good level of data protection for your resources. You've got comprehensive network security around for how things are configured and how things are protected with your network security groups and also your networking connections. But then we also have an active threat protection piece to this as well, and also security management. But instead of showing you the marketing slide, I thought I would switch over here and just show you instead just a quick little look at what exists for our environment. So Security Center is obviously going to be found in here on the left-hand side as a menu item. In case you didn't know, you can actually move those menu items by simply clicking and dragging them inside of the web portal to make what's important to you come up to the top. So I've got the Security Center right up at the very, very top there. Now, in my role at Microsoft, I actually have access to probably 30 or 40 different subscriptions that I've been granted access to. So this probably applies to you as well. So Security Center is able to go in and you can filter based on what subscriptions you want to place your reports on. I'm only looking at 3 of my subscriptions right now, as you can see. And I figured what better ones to look at than my own demo account, as well as my brothers and sisters that exist inside of the cloud advocacy organization that I'm part of, because we do demos all the time. We set up environments all the time. So there'll be some interesting data in those ones there to look at as well. And you can see here that we've kind of done a way of going through and giving you a score rating. Now, the score rating is going to be different for everybody. The different types of resources that you have are going to have different score values. You add up those score values to come up with your total maximum. If you're able to go off and to achieve nirvana and get your maximum score, congratulations. However, we're going to give you recommendations on how to fix things that are high priority and then work your way down, because it's going to take some time to go through some of this. So the score is one thing to be aware of, and basically, as new threats are identified, this score is going to change and go up as the new maximum, because there's new things you could possibly do to be able to help secure your environment. We also have down here a breakdown with overall hygiene on the different systems. You can see that overall it's analyzed, and I've got about 320 different unhealthy resources that I should possibly look at. And then we've grouped them together into compute, into networking, into identity, data, as big buckets of things you can go off and take a look at. And then down below is the one I'm going to be showing you here, is some interesting stuff for some threats that are active, that are going on, that potentially could be fixed and taken a look at as well. On the left-hand side, just to show a couple of these, just from an overview perspective, you've got, a breakdown specifically on the scores. You've got different policies. You've got an interesting view I'll show you at the end called regulatory compliance view, which is interesting. But then likewise, we break it down into compute, networking, data, identity, and security solutions as well. Interesting stuff there. But then we also give you some specific tools that I'll be showing you in a little bit of time here as well. One of them is called just-in-time VM access, which is quite good. So this is one quick view of all 3 subscriptions. That could be 300 subscriptions. That could be 10. That could be 1. That's there. Now, there is the free tier, and then there is the standard tier. Standard tier is something that's going to incur an additional monthly charge for you to be able to analyze those. And you can basically turn on your paid tier, your standard tier, just by choosing the option, enabling it, and then within 24 hours, it becomes active on your system. What that means is we now start looking for more stuff inside of your environment that you now granted us access into. That's the very quick overview of just simply where it is. Let me just show you this score as an example that's in here. The score is broken down, as I mentioned, into a maximum, for my case, of 3 subscription of 940 because of the types of resources I've deployed. If I go in, I can take a look at, by category, where are my score factors for compute? And then down here, you can see that I've got some bright red. I should probably look at that. I have some oranges and greens, and I've got some blues, which are okay. And it gives me a little summary of each one. So I'll go into each one of these types of examples of some recommendations. But what I wanted to call out from here is, even if you just get nothing else from this session, if you just come and look at Security Center, even on the free tier, that doesn't cost you a dime, if you just come in and look at that section, look at your threats, and then you'll see recommendations of things you should do, promise me you'll explore what each one of those could be and then turn it on to increase your security footprint on the Azure side of things. Please at least promise me you'll do that by the end of this session. I will caveat that by saying, don't get all gung-ho and start implementing all the changes. That's different, because obviously you got to see what the impact is for those changes you turn on. So just explore and figure out what it is on the free side, and then look at the value you get, obviously, by going to a higher end side of a paid subscription instead. I'll go back to Security Center, come back over here, start that back up again, and take a look at this concept. So we have a unique intelligence, I mentioned, this whole plethora of information, of resources that we're making available to every single customer of Azure, that is available all from the public information of things coming in to try to attack our customers, to the point where it gets to the border, if you will, of where the customer happens to be, and then we stop. We don't go any further inside of there. We only go up to that one point. We take that and we're able to analyze this with machine learning to come up with trends and patterns to find out things like where new malicious actors are, a different type of brute force attempt is going on, or maybe there's a new malicious executable that happens to be out there. We can take that and then analyze that with our threat intelligence and also with our different security resource providers that we have to be able to do it. And then we're able to come up with different levels of analytics to be able to provide you with reports and recommendations on how to fix things. So something that's very simple, like we are able to go in and say, well, if I have a virtual machine that's based out of the Amsterdam or based out of the Europe West data center, and then I happen to have a user that is physically signing on from the UK on a regular basis to that machine, that appears to be normal based on that behavior. If all of a sudden that user, after logging in from the UK at 12:01, at 12:02 tries to log in from the Sudan, I'm pretty sure it's not the same person. Something's going on as far as just even login information, that's physically impossible to log in from two different spots so close in time. So one very simple example of some behavior analytics that can come in there as well. So the threat protection concept is that we're able to go in and take all these different issues that have come in and make them available across these different resources and services, bring them into an environment, and then make them available to our engines to display resource recommendations to you. We're also able to go through, and you're able to go in and to look at this data in a format where you can take action on it, or maybe you're just doing reporting on that information. You don't have to grant everyone access to that full level of information that's out there. It's simply a matter of turning on a threat protection level for these different types of resources that happen to be out there. From a threat protection perspective, let me go back and take a look at an example here from some of those recommendations that existed. So these are the recommendations that are coming up across all three of my subscriptions. I mentioned to you earlier, if possible, the area you want to focus on at first is going to be the high score ones that are up here that are going to make the biggest difference and impact on your environment. Things like, the owner permission on a subscription is basically the most powerful user account on that Azure subscription that exists. You probably want to protect that one with something like an MFA, multi-factor authentication login, besides just a regular login. So go ahead and set that up. Something like going in and using just-in-time network access control for when I want to access a machine. The management ports are off by default. If I want to turn them on only for a period of 1 hour and have authenticated access to that as well, those are things you can go in and turn on. If I go in and take a look at the first one, the MFA, it's going to give you a quick description of what that particular recommendation is. It's going to tell you what type of threats it's going to prevent. It also then is going to go in and identify which resources are actually the most vulnerable. As you can see, all three of these subscriptions currently have an owner who does not have MFA turned on. I'm able to go in and actually enable MFA for accounts with owner permissions. And then this is going to go in and actually, because MFA setup is a bit more comprehensive, it's not as simple as clicking a button to turn it on, it's going to send me to knowledgeable resources on our doc site specifically about how to set that up, what the implications are, and what the changes are that have to be done to my system. So that's an example of a remediation and a step-by-step guidance on how to enable this that is more comprehensive than simply turning something on. If I go down, come back again here to my recommendations, take a look at enabling network security groups on subnets as an example. I've got 30 different, I've got possible 18 out of 30 points on this one here. If I scroll down, I've got 20 of my subnets that are healthy because they have NSGs. I've got 14 of my subnets that do not have NSGs on them, which means it's basically an open network. I haven't locked it down anymore. I can go through and take a look and see where those happen to be. In this case, they all happen to be inside of my beta and demos. Oh, and there's a couple inside of my own one down there too for this one sample environment that I have. If I go in here and take a look at my sample for the RIC demo account, it actually shows me which account it happens to be, and it shows me which endpoints are on there. And basically, it allows me to go ahead and to build a NSG if I wanted to on that particular one, or manage it in any other way that I needed to. So it deep links down to the individual resources that happen to be impacted by those particular recommendations. You can sort through these by individual category. You can leave them big and broad as we have them right now. If I go back in here and take a look just at the compute, for instance, it's going to filter them down to just simply the VM side, as you've seen here. List off all the virtual machines inside of my subscriptions that could have changes to them. Some of them are part of my Kubernetes environment, so I'm going to have to take those in a special way of being able to manage them as opposed to just a generic VM. I can also go through and take a look at my app services, my cloud services. In this case, my demo machines don't have any. Oh, but I do have the app services, sorry, that are there. And then potentially, as new technology becomes available, so for instance, our Kubernetes services exist, we make new functionality available inside of the threat assessment tool to also help identify and configure those options as they become available as new services on top of Azure. So you're not just stuck with a one form fits all. We get customized with each one for how it goes and gets applied. So the threat tools and recommendation tools dynamically change based on which ones are present inside of your environments, plus also which services you have inside of your environment. But if we drill into like another example of something that's very important, specific around to IaaS. IaaS is near and dear to my heart. It generally is one of the first areas most customers expand into when they start using the public cloud, because it's the natural progression from on-premises virtualization to understand how it works inside of a cloud environment. And so we have a bunch of tools that work specifically just with VMs with IaaS technologies. I'll be showing you the just-in-time access, which is a very interesting tool that we have available. Update software and Azure Software Update capable. Because we have, if you turn on this functionality, we take a look at your machines that are there. We use the standard logs that would exist for VMs, be they Windows or Linux-based, that would identify what versions of different apps, what versions of different pieces of software and drivers are installed on them, to give you recommendations on whether or not things need to be updated or patched. We also have the ability to go through and do file integrity monitoring to see if anyone's changed files from when they were first initially scanned, to be able to have you roll back what those changes happen to be, and also have the ability to go through and do some adaptive application control for which apps are allowed to run on different systems, which ones are not. Software Update is my particular one that I like an awful lot, because it does work with both Windows and Linux-based. The idea, when you go through with your recommendations, it's going to go off and show you the number of operating systems you have. Do you have high? Do you have medium? Do you have low? Different vulnerabilities that need to be addressed with different software updates. And then it lists off which ones need to apply to which machines. And you can even go off and enable them to go off and do that deployment if we have the Azure agent installed on those particular boxes. Now, another neat thing about this is that, at least for things like Azure Software Update and others, we have the ability to also work not just with your cloud-based IaaS instances, you also can work with your on-premises instances of machines as well. So keep that in mind when we're talking about some of these different resources that are out there. But the one I wanted to show you right now is actually the just-in-time access, or JIT as it's called. In the past, when you deployed a machine, be it Windows or Linux, it would have the management ports that are open potentially for you to use. Because how else, after you deploy that machine, are you going to go off and manage it after the fact? So the idea was, with the number of times we had folks that would leave those ports open to work with them, but then also would assign a public IP address to that machine, would mean that that port was now open to that public IP address, which is definitely not a good thing. So we actually created this JIT on Azure specifically for VM access, where it's an audited, enabled technology. You simply choose the machine and then configure it to work with JIT. So an example that we have, I've got in this machine here, a machine that happens to be in Asia, my Asia data center, Singapore. This will fail. I'll tell you this right now. It's going to try to attach to this particular port. It knows the address, it knows what's there. It's actually going to end up failing because I have JIT turned on. I have not made my initial request to be able to go off and to launch into that one. Standard error message you expect to be able to see. That was called my Asia Windows box. If I go back into my security center, scroll down here to just-in-time access, which is just right here on the side, just-in-time access, down in this area here. It's going to go through all my subscriptions, show me which VMs I have, and then which ones are currently configured to use it. And you can see here two things I wanted to show you. Asia Win is the box I tried to attach to. There has been no new JIT requests for that particular box. There was one for a machine called Win West that took place yesterday, by myself, Rick Claus. There was one request that went into that one there. So if I go in here to Azure Win, and I just choose Request Access, I'm going to want to use, because it's a Windows box, port 3389. I want it locked to only work with my current session's IP address that I'm running with right now. And I want to make it available for 3 hours by default. I'm going to scale this down to just 1 hour. I'm going to say go ahead and open up those ports. In the background, we've now gone in and we have now updated the security group protecting that VM, opened up port 3389, but instead of saying to any, the star, we said just to the IP address that initiated that request from this portal, and only open up port 3389, and the counter has now started for 1 hour for that to be open. So now if I go in and take a look at that box, choose Properties. Here's my box. It warns me there's some recommendations for it, which is interesting. I got some activity going on there, which is normal. It's all looking good. I'm going to do your standard download the connect. I'm going to use an RDP. I've already done the requested access, so I just need to go off and say download the RDP file. That looks like a connection at this point in time, which tells me the port was open. Go ahead and make that connect. Hopefully I delayed long enough with my explanation that it finished what it needed to finish. Whew, it did work. I have to hide the Windows Hello so I can use a different account to log in with. Having the correct password is always good. Thank you very much. This means I've made my connection. I now have my certificates going on. You probably have seen the screen before. Go ahead and trust that one. Make that connection, and then boom, I've now logged in. This was not possible, as you saw, less than 3 minutes ago, but was in an automated fashion turned on. There's now a logged event that says this person, Rick Claus at Microsoft.com, made the request as part of my tenant to access this box. He made that access request for 1 hour, and boom, by the way, he also connected in and logged in and now is doing work and functioning on that one individual box. I will mention that obviously, if I stay on with this session and it stays running and 1 hour occurs, it's actually still going to let the connection continue because there's no new connection request being made. The session is still live. As soon as I disconnect, it's going to go off and kill that. I'm no longer going to have access to it. So in this case, I'm good. Prove that it worked. Close it down. And that session is now available for me to connect back up to again for the next 59 minutes and 50 seconds until that port closes down because I made my disconnect. The actual session on the box itself would still run, but I would not be able to get access to it from the network anymore because the network port's going to be closed when that JIT access request is removed. And you noticed if you don't happen to be using Windows, that would also obviously work for your other standard protocols like SSH if you wanted to SSH into your Linux boxes as well. It's not just a uniquely Windows thing. It works with any VM in the IaaS state. So that was our JIT access to it. Now, another one that comes up as an interesting way of being able to protect your resources is obviously going off and taking a stance where I want to encrypt my VM's OS disks and my VM's disks. And I don't want to have to manage those different keys. So you can use a key vault service that we provide, which is an HSM, which allows you to go in and to store the secrets and the encryption certificates on that particular box for use. And then you grant access to that particular key vault for the VM instance to be able to go off and decrypt its hard drives. The encryption of virtual hard disk is something that's very simple to do. You should also look at possibly installing some endpoint protection, protect your different subnets and different VNets correctly with different security groups. And then obviously another layer of extra security you can add into your VM infrastructure is to go in and to add in some level of a domain join, like an Azure Active Directory join, so that you know the credentials that are being used to log into your different boxes. Now this next demo, because it is encryption, it is going to be something that I'm going to video and show you here because it takes time to complete this, and I'm pretty sure you don't want to see a progress bar as far as the demo is concerned. So take a look at this one here. You can see that that particular VM currently is running. Encryption is not enabled from that particular corner box you can see. Going to a PowerShell command line inside of Azure Shell, I'm just going to go ahead and create a resource group here. And then I'm going to put my key vault creation inside there as well. So I now have a new key vault that's going to store my keys. So it knows what the name is going to be. It has to be unique. And it's going to do a creation on a particular location as well. And then finally, the command that was there allowed me to simply grant access to a service account to use that particular environment. The actual encryption of the VM is a command that's going to reference the key vault that was created and the user account that was set up, the service account that was set up, to be able to do that encryption. So there's the key vault there details, there's encryption key details to use, and then it's going to go through and identify the resource group that it belongs to, and then which key to use as well. The actual encryption command is this one right here that simply says Azure RM VM encrypt the disk with the extension, use the resource group. The virtual machine name you can see there is TT216-AI, or A1, sorry. Go ahead and do the encryption. Here's the key vault. Here's the key I want to use. Here's where you store it. And then here's the ID that you have to use as well. What that command does when it gets executed is it gives you a yes/no prompt. Are you sure you want to continue? You go ahead and say yes. And this is where you would have to wait the 15, 20 minutes as that drive goes off and is encrypted, all to get that response that comes back and says encrypted is now true. And then if we flip back to the actual portal itself, the portal now, when we do a refresh on that page, now has the state as encrypted on that running VM in the background to be able to have that VM up and encrypted. And now, if anyone happened to download that particular VHD file because the malicious actor had access to your storage account, tried to mount that on a local Hyper-V system or mount it inside their own subscription elsewhere, they would not be able to have that machine boot up or have access to anything on that box because the encryption keys are stored in your HSM account on your own subscription that you hopefully have gone off and protected away as well. Now, identity is something that we have to take very seriously. The concept of identity really has now evolved into a point where identity is your control plane. Your Azure sign-ins or your Active Directory sign-ins that are federated up into the Azure environment as the optimal experience makes it so that you can identify groups of people that would now have rights on the systems. And you can assign those groups of people, those groups of individuals or groups themselves, roles to be able to do different things. Their experience with the portal is going to be different based on what roles you've assigned. If you take a native blank subscription from start, and you start to use it, it is the true Wild West. Anyone can deploy anything as long as they have a contributor level of access inside of the topmost root of that environment. And that generally is not what you want to do inside of your environment. So what we found is that customers have a much better experience with their agile environments of multiple people accessing these subscriptions if they have these guide rails set up in place, these different roles and policies in place that people can do it. It's all going to happen using Azure Active Directory tenants, and then you apply those different rights down to those different organizations. There is a session tomorrow that is called Azure Governance in the hybrid. It's HYB 4.0. We do a whole 1 hour long session just talking about governance and how to set up environments so that you can have restrictions with lots of flexibility for your dev environments and your production environments and how to transfer those between subscriptions. I highly recommend that session. So the concept of least privilege is simply giving everyone exactly what they need to do to get the job done. That doesn't mean that every single person has the ability to create VMs unabashedly anywhere. Anyone can spit up a new Kubernetes cluster that's out there. But the idea is that you just give them what you need to with what's known as role-based access control. Role-based access controls are able to be applied at management group levels, which span subscriptions. They can be set up at an entire subscription level, or more commonly, you'll see them put down on resource groups. I typically will have a resource group created to kind of compartmentalize one of my workloads that I want to put onto Azure. And then I grant my teams the proper rights at that resource group level so that they can just work inside of that one environment correctly with whatever tools that they want to use. So again, in the interest of time, here's a quick little video about role-based access control. you can see here under virtual machines, there are no virtual machines listed. If you look up in the top right-hand corner, the individual here is called Don Funk at Tailwind Traders. In this case, if I do a refresh, nothing happens, there's nothing there. Now if you take a look, I'm the prime administrator at Tailwind Traders in the right-hand corner. And you can see, obviously, I see a workstation or a VM that's up and running inside of my environment. But the Don Funk does not have access to it. If I go into the properties of that specific machine, I could do this at the resource group level if I wanted to, but at that specific machine, I choose access control, or IAM. I can then go in and see who currently has roles assigned to them, and you can see here, there are actually 2 people that are identified in this particular subscription. One of them is called Oren Thomas, the other one is the prime administrator having owner rights over top of this area. I simply go in and click on the Add button, and then choose the type of access I want to grant them. Notice the pre-built roles that exist for the most common of that particular type. There's actually hundreds of different types of roles, but we filter them based on the object that you have selected. In this case, we just care about what's known as the virtual machine contributor level down below. That's going to give them full rights to that machine and that machine only inside of this area. And I'm going to choose Don Funk because he's part of the demo. Hit the Save button. And then this now gets applied, little dot, dot, dot as it finishes off. Now it's disappeared, it's completed. And if I flip back over here to Don Funk, he does a refresh on his web page. He now sees that particular workstation and can do what he needs to do on that workstation, including he could connect up to it, he could request a JIT access to it, he could restart it, he could stop it, anything he needs to do, because we've granted Don a contributor role, which is the highest level, on that particular resource to have full functionality of it. Now, picture yourself being able to grab those different roles, grab different policies, and then bundle them together, and then apply those to subscription 2 and subscription 3 and subscription 4, but they're always going to be applied the same way across all 3 subscriptions. We can do that now with a technology called Azure Blueprints, which again, we talk about in the session that's coming up, talking about governance on the Azure side of things. So I've talked about a lot of things so far, and this is just a broad overview. This is not depth discussion around security other than the mental mindset that you happen to have. I thought I would compile a quick list of probably my best and easiest recommendations for you that are out there. The very first one, as you saw from the highest score level, is you should absolutely investigate and understand how to turn on 2-factor authentication for privilege level accounts to your Azure subscriptions, to be able to have your gold accounts protected, if you will, that's out there. Then take a look at role-based access control for different administrative accounts so that you have people that are responsible for compute, people that are responsible for networking, people that are responsible for app services. That's going to be unique to your environment. You have to do a bit of the research on that one there. Then go ahead and enable privileged identity management for different roles of different teams. I definitely recommend you configure JIT for your virtual machines if you need to have some level of an access that's out there. Encrypting of hard disks is a way of keeping any kind of VM proliferation being moved outside of your account and people having access to it. And the biggest one out of them all is really take a look at Azure Security Center. Look at those recommendations that it makes for you inside your environment, and then take a look and see if it's going to make sense for you to take a look at what a standard subscription is going to look at. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you have probably heard of this small conference that exists that happened a couple of weeks ago called RSA in North America. It's a pretty well-known security conference out there. We made some pretty big announcements at that one there, and the biggest one I had to update to be able to share with you today is this one that's called Azure Sentinel. It's currently in preview. Preview means it's free for you to use and to try. And it's also fully functional for what you want to go off and do it, but we add more functionality to it. It's basically a security analytics solution that looks at your entire enterprise, not just on-prem, not just the stuff that's inside of Azure, but basically anything. And the concept behind it is, like any intrusion detection, like any analytics solution that exists that you might already have right now on premises, Sentinel is one that works at cloud scale. Limitless as far as the size is concerned for the amount of data that it can ingest. Limitless with the amount that it can learn from different things and apply machine learning to it to be able to then give you information and reports about different threats and analytics that happen inside your environment. The biggest thing it does is it collects across all your users, your devices, your applications, and your infrastructure that exists on-prem and in the cloud, and even multiple clouds that are out there. It goes through and detects potential patterns you never even noticed before across all those different services, and minimizing false positives that exist as well because of the analytics that we have, plus we bring all of our learnings that we happen to have from all of our internal IP. It's able to go through and help you configure different investigations into cases that it identifies as being something worth looking into in more detail. And then also how to go off and to respond to different incidents quickly in an automated fashion or with some level of user intervention, one or the other. I left the URL at the bottom. You have access to these slides after the event. If you just simply type in the words Azure Sentinel to your favorite search engine, whatever it may be, you'll find the landing page that's there. It's got some phenomenal videos to learn about it. I did not have time to include any of that in this particular talk that's out there. But I wanted to, first of all, identify for you some next steps that you should take a look at. The first thing is the demos that I very quickly showed you, including the recorded ones, are available for you to try with some guidance if you want to set them up yourself. Available from the download location of MS Ignite, the tour, and also the code for these particular demos and the information sheets for how they work is at the MS Ignite, the tour code, those two URLs there. What I will mention is there's also something that you haven't had a chance to take a look at potentially just yet, is we have a new functionality called Microsoft Learn as a new environment that we've created. These are guided step-by-step flows. These are analysis sessions with a live sandbox that you can play with and use to try hands-on experiences with things right now today without having to actually sign in. We have 5 things lessons you can take a look at specifically from the security perspective. And then we also have one on the Azure integrated control. But what I would ask you in closing on this one here is the approach that we've taken today and the tour using this concept of learning paths. This is the fundamentals learning path, which builds you through gradually through 5 different sessions worth of content to give you a good grounding overview of what exists. It's a relatively new concept that we're trying out. I would be very interested to hear from you in your evaluations, if you could, in the comment section. Tell us, how did it work? Did you enjoy the concept of learning paths? Is it something we should continue? This is a new way that we're trying to build some of the content that we're doing as opposed to just a single one-off session on topic X or topic Y. We still have those as well, but these learning paths are relatively new. I encourage you to take a look at the rest of the learning paths that exist. Tomorrow, I know one that's near and dear to my heart is the hybrid track. I'll be speaking to that one there, talking about disaster recovery and governance. But we have a whole track about how to work inside of a hybrid environment inside of Azure and on premises as well. There's also obviously tracks on the modern dev, on migration, and on data solutions as well. But with that, I'll say, with the last 56 seconds that I happen to have, thank you very much for sitting with me in this dark and lonely room. I can only see the first row, as I mentioned. If you're interested, again, to be able to come and talk to me, my entire team and all the different speakers that are here are all going to be hanging out inside of the experts area and inside of the showcase area on either side today at 4 o'clock. Come and engage with us, ask us questions. We love it when you do that. We love engaging and talking with you. Thank you very much for joining me in this one room. If you enjoyed this session, my name is Rick Claus. If you did not like this session, my name is Oren Thomas. Thank you very much, everybody.